and I have a microphone. So let's see, this is really an official meeting of the WPCA. It's a special meeting, and we have a quorum of commissioners here. So that makes it official according to the laws of the land. And I'm going to give some introductory remarks a little bit later, but first our moderator, Greg Dombrowski, is going to say something, and then followed by our first selectman.
Thanks, Nelson. Thank you all for coming. Great turnout. For those in the back that can't see the screen, I encourage you to move up. We've got the biggest font we can accommodate. So if you can't see the screen, please feel free to move up. A couple housekeeping items. First of all, there was a sign-up sheet out at the desks when you walked in. If you didn't sign up, please do so before you leave so we can contact you. And just keep a record of who was here tonight. Next, I'd like to mention that this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube on the town website. And if you've not seen the YouTube on the town website, you go to Brookfield CT.gov, and you go down to board meetings, town hall YouTube videos, upcoming live streams, and then this presentation is now being streamed. It's also being recorded and will be on the WPCA and the Brookfield Town website. If I can ask before we get started to please silence your cell phones. If the meeting really gets to start running a little long in the tooth, we'll probably take a break, maybe, but if we're not at least halfway through by 8:30, we'll look for a raise of hands to see if you want to take a little break before we finish up the meeting. We do have to be out of here by 10:30. So around 10 o'clock, that's PM tonight, not tomorrow morning. So if we're not wrapping up by around 10, we'll probably start to wind the meeting down, but there's more meetings like this to come. You're going to see information where you can add additional questions. If you can't ask them or they're not answered, this is the first of many information sessions that we'll be doing on this particular project. So that's it for opening comments. So with that, I'd like to get us started on the agenda. We have several speakers, we have several presentations, and obviously some public comments at the end. So with that, Tara Carr, our first select woman, for some opening comments, please.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here for the Cemetery Commission meeting. I'm not kidding. If anybody would like to sign up for that, that's the next thing that I have to get going. So, just by show of hand, how many are here from, I'll just by neighborhood, Dean and Pocono? Okay. And the Shores Tax District? You've got a beautiful sunset tonight. We're through here. Driving over from that side of town, I was like, oh, they're all going to miss the sunset tonight. But Candlewood Lake Club community. And other areas, Arrowhead Point, yeah. Okay, so there's a pretty big, and Candlewood Lake Road section area. All right, so you all have nothing better to do tonight, obviously, but in all seriousness, for those of you I haven't met yet, it's a pleasure. Thank you for being here. This is an information session, so I first and foremost want to thank our volunteers and our paid employees who have been working diligently on this project for quite some time. You know, I'm in office 9 months now. I was elected last year, and I like to say I inherited this. So this has also been a huge learning curve for me, and I'm still in the process of learning. I too am a resident of one of your communities. I live in the Candlewood Lake Club on Indian Trail. So I'm still in the mode of trying to gather the information and really deliberate as to what's going on here, right? I think that's where we all pretty much stand. Some of you may have already made up your mind, an absolute no. Some of you may have already decided it's a yes. For me, I'm somewhere in between. I'm going to be completely honest with you. But I do want to tell you a little bit about myself just because most of you I have not met. I was born at 947 Candlewood Lake Road 44 years ago. The lake is very near and dear to my heart. Some of you may have heard me say publicly that I'm on this crusade to save the lake. And do I mean that? yes and no, right? Like, we all want the lake to be as wonderful as we all love it to be. Can I personally do that? Am I getting on board with all of this to save the lake? Absolutely not. Again, I have to learn more, I need to understand more, but at the end of the day, we want the lake to be, for our children and our grandchildren and their children, to be what we all know and love as it is today. I will say that I was gone for 25 years in the Army on active duty, and over that course of time I came back periodically because my family's still in the area, and I saw the difference unraveling right before my eyes every time I came back. There just seemed to be more people, more development, more boats. And then I moved back finally with my family in January of 2020. COVID happened, and there's been a major influx of people to the area because of COVID. In fact, there was an article in the paper where it said 35,000 residents out of New York in particular have come to Fairfield and Litchfield counties within the last 2 years. Some of you may be reading the Danbury News Times or not, or seeing online versions of different things. I know social media is a huge influence, but the News Times did report specifically on license plates, and I'm not going to go off on a tangent about that, but in the state of Connecticut, if you've been in your municipality for over 90 days, your vehicle is to be registered to that locality. So that's why the article hit on the influx of out-of-state people to the area. So what does that mean? It directly affects our lake, right? When you have more people in any given location, there's more problems. And this is a very big one. When I went into the town hall in December of last year, I noticed very quickly that there was a bucket, an invisible bucket. I call it the too hard to do bucket. And for many, many years, nobody's even acknowledged the fact that this bucket exists. Well, on day one, I dove into the bucket and started pulling stuff out and sifting around in there and trying to figure it all out, because Brookfield is very different than it was 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago. So we're facing challenges that we just hadn't seen in the past. When you drive south on Candlewood Lake Road to the old Wallbomb shopping area, which is now shortly going to be an Amazon Fresh, you may see panhandlers. These are just little examples of things that our town has not seen before. We have a homeless population. We have dilapidated schools, quite frankly, which is why we're now building a new elementary school. And for those of you who haven't been following, this is another question. I know you guys have a lot of questions, so I'm not going to stand up here and continue to ask many, but I did want to know, just by show of hand, how many of you voted in the referendum in the spring? How many of you voted a couple of weeks ago for school security in the town meeting? I mean, not for or against, but we're here to vote. Okay. So, again, I'm really impressed by your all's turnout. Whatever you did to get your people here, that's amazing. I wish more people would come forward for all of these other things. You know, we are a town meeting form of government, and for those of you who are not familiar with the charter, and you're now encouraged for whatever reason to be more interested in local and municipal government, I would encourage you to take a really good hard look at our charter. It happens to be a charter revision year as well. So if anybody has any recommendations for the revision, please go forward to the Charter Revision Commission and let your voice be heard. The charter is what governs our town. And again, touching back on the finances, we are in this era of fiscal fragility. So for those of you who did follow the referendum through the spring, I've said several times that, and this was before the Ukraine situation, before the economy went haywire, and it's very volatile right now, but we were already in this debt bubble because we are building a new school with a price tag of $80 million. We do have old debt at the price tag of $30 million. There's a lot of things financially that Brookfield is just in this very fragile state, and we've now entered the debt bubble. So fortunately they forecasted that, but now with inflation, fuel prices going up, we are now instituting school security as a layered approach. Healthcare across the board for all employees is just skyrocketed. There's just needs that keep popping up. Every capital project, the price of those keeps going up and up at every turn. So we're in a very kind of different era than we were even a year ago. Touching back to the lake, in May, as I learned more about this project particularly, I decided that I wanted to have what was called a meeting of the minds to bring all the players together. Because it was my understanding up until that point, nobody had ever really kind of talked about this issue collectively. At that point, I had already been in touch with my colleague, Mayor Dean Esposito, former Mayor Mark Boughton, who's now Commissioner Boughton, Matt Knickerbocker of Bethel, who's now left for Wilton, and the folks we share the lake with. So Pat in New Fairfield and Pete in New Milford. I was with Pete again yesterday. Sherman, Don Lowe, he's great, but those 5 mayors and first selectmen had never sat down at the same table together. So they were all on board, everybody came, we invited our departments of public health, DPW, we invited, WPCA was the host, we had Commissioner Dykes out of Hartford on board, we had a plethora of other people, some state representatives, we had Candlewood Lake Authority, First Light, Deep was there. So it was a really kind of well-received meeting, and that was just a starting place for all of us to come together and say, hey, what is the status of the lake? What is going on here vis-a-vis not only just this project, but the lake writ large. And at the end of the meeting, everybody was in agreement and said, something has to be addressed sooner rather than later in order to protect the lake that we all love. I hope that kind of summarizes what I've been through over the last 9 months. If anybody has any pointed questions for me or anything in particular that they really want to ask or get after as far as I'm concerned, please feel free to email me or stop by town hall or even ask me after this meeting. I would stay until 10:30 tomorrow morning if need be, but I think we're all going to get kicked out of here by 10:30 tonight. Enough said. I hope that you all have a great evening.
Thanks, Tara. Next on the agenda, Nelson is going to make some comments about the WPCA's mission and some other background information for you.
Okay, thank you, Greg. The Water Pollution Control Authority, or affectionately known as the WPCA.
Could you stand closer to the microphone, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
The WPCA, if you put that in a search engine, you'll find everything Connecticut, because that's a uniquely a Connecticut term, and except for maybe one radio station in Montana. But apart from that, the WPCA is tasked with dealing with pollution problems in a town. There's a very broad charter, and there's 169 towns in Connecticut. Not everyone has a WPCA, but most do. The WPCA in Brookfield has 8 commission positions, and they're appointed by the Board of Selectmen, and currently there are 2 open positions. WPCA started in 1975 with beginning to sewer up and down the federal road for commercial properties. And but 1975 is pretty late in the history of Brookfield, and so, but that's in fact when it started. And then it was historically to do commercial corridors and then condo associations. And beginning in 2018, we began to work with Candlewood Lake Authority to determine if the lake was a problem and that might need to be addressed. And you could put those slides up of the, is it the next? There it is. And so what we did was, one of the things we did was we captured satellite images of the lake on a clear day, and then these satellite images you can filter for any wavelength, And the wavelength for phosphorus was the one it was tested for. And the picture on the left shows the lake after 3 days of rain. And so you can see there's no phosphorus, or it doesn't appear to be phosphorus coming in from the water runoff of the streets, coming in from the watershed. The picture on the right shows the lake after 10 days of no rain. And this is the only hydraulic input into the lake at that point is from the wastewater coming in, filtered in through the ground and into the lake. And so we can see that there's an impact of septic flow into the lake. And so that sort of caught our attention, and we moved on from there. It's interesting that First Light is here in support of the program, and they're the ones that own the lake. You've heard of them. And Brian indicated to me that up in Lake George, where he was just vacationing, that anybody within 500 feet of the lake must introduce sewers. Must have a sewer connection. So some states are a little more proactive than others. In 2019, the WPCA was awarded a Clean Water Fund planning grant for 2 reasons. One was to do a complete facilities plan for Brookfield, and that's online. And another was to study the Candlewood Lake area in Brookfield to determine if there was a wastewater environmental issue at the peninsula and how extensive it might be. So if you've looked on the website and at those reports, you'll see them labeled as task 1, 2, and 3, and they're there in quite a bit of detail. They're fairly technical, but they do tell the whole story. Then those two study grants were awarded through what's called RFQ, or Request for Qualification process. And that process is to invite people to explain what their qualifications are and detail those, and then you interview the ones that you think are the most appropriate and select them. And so for the facilities plan, CDM Smith was selected, and Lombardo was selected for the lake plan, the first lake plan, and those results are all on the website. But know that there's some confusion that even a properly functioning septic system still emits phosphorus and nitrogen. The bugs don't eat that; they just pass right through, and so they enter the soils. And in some studies, they show that after a period of rain, some of it gets flushed out and increases the level of these nutrients in the lake, and that's online. There was a septic survey also that was done, and it showed a relatively high incident of issues, including odors. When you put a sewer system in there, there's virtually no odors in modern sewer installations. But some complain, please talk to my neighbor and have him fix her system. That wasn't the purpose of the survey. It was just to discover what issues might be, and about a third of them have had issues over the years, and many of them on lots are too small to be code-compliant systems. There are other reports, including a water balance on the peninsula, that shows about 25% of the septic discharge goes into the well water, 75%, and the rest goes into the lake. And so that's also online. There were consultations.
Can I interrupt you real quick?
But now,
When were these studies done?
these recent, they're all recent.
What's recent?
2019, 20, 21, so they're done.
What's the actual date of those slides?
Photograph.
Yeah.
Oh, this is what sort of tipped it off. One was 2012 and the other is 2013, I think, on the right.
Or is there one? Like today?
Yeah, no, well, we could do it again, but it's not going to change.
Excuse me, we're going to have to keep to the agenda, and questions and comments can be made, and they will be made. Let's get through the presentations first, if you don't mind, please. So let's hold the comments until we get to that point in the agenda. Thank you.
So we had other consultations with lake experts and town officials just to be sure we were not, we were on the beam in terms of determining, and no one has suggested that if you introduce septic sewers into this area, that the lake will deteriorate the quality of the lake. The reasons to move forward were and are elevated levels of phosphorus, proven in several ways, elevated levels of nitrogen and other contaminants in the drinking water, E. coli at high level, enough to close the beaches, and the source of the E. coli has determined to be human waste, not Canada geese. As to along Dean and Pocono roads, there are 91 low-lying properties with non-compliant septic systems that cannot be code compliant by today's standards because they have to be certain a level above the groundwater. The town sanitarian has about for a decade advocated sewering in the area. It has long been tagged as an area of concern, and studies show high levels of phosphorus in the drain fields and E. coli on the ground.
Where's the study?
That's online too. These are all online. And so anyway, there is sort of an overview of why the WPCA would go forward. And so now we're going forward to take the next step to do this work. And it's not a done deal, it's just we're going and doing what makes the most sense. I'd like to have Neil Slater come up at this time, and he's a director of ecology with Candlewood Lake Authority, and he's going to speak to the, I'm probably not saying your name right, yeah, but speak to the current status of the lake and trends for the future. He's a director of ecology.
Thank you, Nelson. My name is Neil Stalter. I'm the Director of Ecology for the Candlewood Lake Authority. I started with the authority in 2018, and the WPCA asked me to join and give you guys a little primer on the current status of the lake and a few of the trends that we have seen that Lake Authority has been doing monitoring in Candlewood Lake since 1985. So we've been trying to keep a close look at the trends over time and see what's changing, what are the areas of concern, these sorts of things. And just so we're all working on the same information tonight on what's happening in the lake currently. And so just to give you guys a quick understanding, I promise I'll be brief. I know that you have a lot of conversation you want to get to tonight. But to give you an understanding, so lakes exist on a spectrum called eutrophication. That word isn't important. But basically it's a scale from a beautiful, crystal clear mountain lake all the way to sort of a very green, over-vegetated, shallow, swampy body of water. So lakes sort of exist on this scale, and over time, naturally, they'll begin to approach that farther end of the scale, that green, sort of unpleasant end of the scale. And we're talking about a time scale of tens of thousands of years, potentially, for certain lakes. So when we're talking about protecting the lake, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to slow that process down. You know, we maybe can try to reverse it in ways that, but really what we're actively trying to do is slow it down. And when more people move to a lake and live on it and enjoy it, what naturally begins to happen is we're actually speeding that process up. So the way that those processes are sped up there's a multitude. It's a really complex system, right? We're talking about stormwater, we're talking about septic leaching, we're talking about, new impervious surfaces that are increasing levels of runoff. We're talking about removing vegetation. These are all things that can have an impact on a lake. And so when we're talking about the current status, I just wanted to give you that primer. Candlewood Lake has, for the length of the time that we have been analyzing it, since 1985, has existed sort of comfortably in the middle of that spectrum. It's called a mesotrophic lake. And that's the majority of the lakes in the country are probably exist sort of in that mesotrophic area. And when we looked at the lake this year, there are a lot of metrics obviously that we use to sort of evaluate water quality, but some of the easy to understand important ones are water clarity and chlorophyll A. And basically what those two are trying to measure is the algal material in the lake, and the algae use those nutrients that, you know, Nelson and everyone else were talking about to grow and reproduce. Now obviously we all sort of don't want a green, unpleasant lake with lots of algae, right? So when we were measuring the lake this year, you know, the word that I would use to describe it is, you know, average, generally unremarkable. We were talking about water clarity measurements of roughly 2.3 meters, which is right smack in the middle of sort of the average since we've been monitoring since 1985. You know, not far down on the spectrum of water clarity, and not, you know, beautiful, super clear. Now, the one remarkable thing that has happened this year on Candlewood Lake, as many of you probably know, is we've lost, you know, the vast majority of the plant material, the macrophytes that are growing at the bottom of the lake. Now that is probably, I shouldn't say probably, that's unrelated to the water chemistry. What we're looking at as an explanation for that is a variety of sort of ecological factors, the drawdown that happens in the winter, the sterile carp that were stocked many years ago in 2015 and 2017, along with climate factors, that sort of thing. But that is sort of separate from the water chemistry conversation that's largely happening tonight. So, you know, I wanted to come away with sort of everyone understanding that the lake is on the spectrum, is existing in the middle, and I think what the WPCA is generally trying to do is pursue, you know, one course of action that may benefit the lake. The magnitude of that is something that, you know, we can't say with any certainty. So, you know, I could wave a magic wand and say, hey, the whole lake is sewered, that would be excellent. You know, in general, that's best management practices for a lake. That's obviously not the situation here, and so that's the conversation that all of you guys are going to be having. But I wanted to illustrate that Candlewood Lake and all lakes are really complex systems. And so when you're talking about nutrients entering the lake, you're not just talking about septic tanks, you're also talking about runoff, you're talking about loss of vegetation, you're talking about fertilizing lawns. One of the main inputs of nutrients in Candlewood Lake, based on our analysis, is actually from the lake bottom sediments. There are nutrients being released sort of naturally over the course of the summer, that then in the fall and spring when the lake turns over, they become sort of homogenized in the water column and become sort of part of the system of the lake. So, you know, all of this to say the lake is really complex. There's a lot of moving parts, but in general, what we're looking at this year as far as water quality is concerned is generally pretty standard. So,
Isn't Brookfield only 9% of the lake waterfront and watershed?
you know, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it is a generally small share. But I know that we're not taking questions, so I'm just going to give the microphone over to Nelson and let you guys have your meeting. But if you want to look at our data, it's on our website, candlewoodlakeauthority.org, along with our contact information. You can talk to me if you have any questions about the lake. I'm always happy to talk to folks. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Neil. This current study is being funded partially by a Clean Water Fund grant, and to do the level of planning and engineering design, it is necessary to undergo, again, the QBS process and to select the engineering team. In this case, there were 5 bidders with 4 detailed interviews, and the team led by C.D.M. Smith was selected above the others by 7 interviewers in Brookfield. And CDM Smith then teamed up with Lombardo Associates, who had done an early study, and CCA, who's done a lot of work in Brookfield and is a Brookfield business. They all had recent experience in Brookfield, and they were the best suited to do that. In the QBS process, the thinking is that if you pick the best people, this is without knowing what the cost of the study would be, that you'd end up getting the best results. So, now the presentations tonight will be a snapshot of the planning process, and it will outline how the final design recommendations will be developed to come up with economical designs. There's no final connection plans by a street, no final selection of pump station locations, no final costs at this stage. We're just explaining how to get there. So at this point, I want to introduce Joe Liberty of CDM Smith to introduce his team.
Thank you, Nelson, and good evening, everyone. It's great to see everybody here for this important public information meeting, and looking forward to hearing from you when we get to the public comment period. My name is Joe LaLiberty. I am the project principal for CDM Smith for this project. A little bit about CDM Smith. We have 90 people thereabouts in Connecticut in our office. We do wastewater work for clients all across Connecticut, dozens of clients, large and small, doing planning efforts, sewer extension efforts, sewer rehabilitation efforts for communities that are also very similar to that of Brookfield, like New Hartford, Clinton, Putnam, Stonington, and several others. Who I have here with me is Christy Wagner. She is the project technical lead. She'll be the one that'll be doing the presentation in just a minute. I have Dan Murphy. He is the project manager for the project. He also was the project manager during the prior planning phase. And Trevor Reister, who's the one who checked you in out front. He's the project engineer that's helping out on the project. And as Nelson mentioned, Pio Lombardo from Lombardo Associates is on our team. And he did the prior study for the Candlewood Lake area. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Christy for the presentation.
Can everyone hear me?
No.
No. How about now?
Closer. Right to your mouth. Right under your chin.
How about now?
Yeah.
A little better? Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. As Joe and Nelson have said, we appreciate everyone's time, and we really do appreciate the feedback, what we've gotten so far, and looking forward to more. Okay. So a brief overview of what we hope to talk through tonight in maybe the next 15 or 20 minutes. We're going to try to keep this part short. Going to give you a little bit of project background, Candlewood Lake, and how we got to the current study areas. An overview of septic systems, which I'm sure many people here are already familiar with. Sanitary sewer, pros and cons. A summary of the current phase of work, which is really looking at feasibility and alternatives. We're looking at flows and treatment options. We've done some geotechnical explorations, and we're looking at different alternatives for potential sewer layouts. We'll be doing cost analysis, listening to public input, and looking at project financing, grant opportunities. We'll go through kind of the upcoming plan for the next several months, and there will be time again for public comments at the end. Okay, for just this slide, I'm going to turn it over to our colleague Pio Lombardo from Lombardo Associates. He's going to talk a little bit more about the lake to expand on what Neil and Nelson have said so far, and then we'll get back into some of the details of the current activities.
Great. Thank you, Christy. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here, and I hope you find this evening of value. We're here to address the issues as professional and manner as possible. Excuse me. What I'm going to speak to is really a summary of the work that we did previously. The results of those reports, they were all published in April 2020. They were done in the prior 2 years, and there were draft reports that were published prior to them, but the final reports for all three activities are on the website. So the data is pretty recent and still relevant, the basic information. Now, in terms of, what were the conclusions of that project that basically is the foundation that we're sort of teeing off from now. You know, the results that we determined as part of it, I'd be happy if we get into the details later on with folks. We can talk about how we got to this point, but it's all documented in the report. Is that what's happening in our perspective, as required, frankly, by the grant, is looking at wastewater management in that Candlewood Lake drainage area in the town, which is predominantly the peninsula and Candlewood Lake shores. So the responsibility that we had is the current wastewater management practices, you know, protecting public health, protecting the environment. And is it what's going on now, quote, the right thing that should be going on? So there's details in the report on all of the information that we gathered and analyzed that allowed us to come to the following 3 conclusions. One of them is that the current practices are making contributions of phosphorus into the Candlewood Lake. We did some very fancy scientific, you know, we had the best person in the world, in my opinion, working with us on the project to quantify how much phosphorus is getting into the lake from the septic systems. Pretty fancy scientific analysis. And the conclusion, and albeit we only had a small number, but the peninsula is pretty uniform. Conditions on the peninsula don't vary very much from one spot to the other. And we spent a lot of time and care in picking the sites to be the appropriate ones. So we were able to conclude quantitatively that there is a fairly significant influence of septics on Candlewood Lake. And just to underline what Nelson said earlier, we made this determination in concert with our professional colleagues. Larry was one of the professional limnologists. I think we had a dozen of those folks. We had 20 meetings, I think, at the meeting. So this was kicked around by our colleagues as well. So we're getting a consensus opinion. And the consensus is virtually what Neil said earlier, that removing septics from the area will enhance the water quality of the lake.
Can you show that on the screen?
Excuse me?
Can you show that on the screen?
No, that's not on the screen. I'm sorry. I'm doing a little extemporaneous. So it will be on the website. Okay? So sorry. So so what Neil was saying is basically it will slow down the eutrophication process. Now, we did make estimates of precisely what that number would be within reason. Okay? And here's the guidelines I would share with you. Clean, good water is basically, you can't be over 10 parts per billion of phosphorus in the water. If you're 20 is really the maximum if you want, let me say, the mesotrophic level, which is, it's got a little tint of green in it, etc. Once you go over 20, and especially if you go over 30, forget about it. You're now in a highly eutrophic, and you're going to get the cyanobacteria, harmful algae occurring. So that's the general guidelines, if you will. We estimated that septic influences, and we used the number of the number of Brookfield properties that drain into Candlewood Lake is 25% of the total of all towns that are within the Candlewood Lake watershed area. So Brookfield represents, a healthy percentage, 25%. The Brookfield influence, that septic influence represents, if I remember right, 8 parts per billion. So we are now talking about septic influence is, of that 10 that you really want, is pretty healthy percentage. And we're not counting what's coming out of stormwater influence and other factors.
Excuse me, but the shores was 7.5.
Excuse me?
The number is 7.5 in the shores. That's the parts per million, and it's been that way for many, many years. It hasn't elevated. You said 8, it's not correct, it's 7.5. Just letting you know.
Sir, excuse me, I'm not understanding the question fully, but the point I'm making, which is correct, the report states that the influence of septics on Candlewood Lake is 8 parts per billion. I'm not talking about Candlewood Shores or anywhere. I'm talking about septics from everybody that are in Candlewood, in the watershed. So in other words, the point being is that it's not an insignificant influence on the lake's quality. That's number one. Number two is that the groundwater aquifer, which is the water supply for Candlewood Shores, Arrowhead Association, and the other associations on the peninsula, is contaminated from septic. And in our professional opinion, the drinking water supply is 25% septic effluent. Okay, that's our best estimate. Okay, that's pretty significant. And nitrate, nitrogen, drinking water violations have occurred during the past in 2017. Okay, the data now is that it's about 8 parts per million on nitrate, nitrogen. 10 is the maximum. That's way too close. Any place that's over 5 is really getting excessive, septic influence. And guess what? There's obviously other issues of concern in wastewater besides nitrogen. So for those reasons, that's the second, if you will, leg of the stool. The third leg of the stool is really I'll just point to the Water Health letter in which they have recommended that the peninsula be sewered for public health reasons. And what that means is that there's a lot of properties that cannot put in a code-compliant system. And variances have to be made, et cetera, so it becomes difficult in that department. So those are the 3 conclusions for Candlewood Lake. One last thing on Candlewood Lake, and then I want to just summarize what we concluded on Dean and Pocono, is that Neil referred to the other significant factor in the Candlewood Lake's water quality is the influence of the sediment. Okay, and that's a very common attribute of lakes as they age. Okay, well, the sediment is a legacy reflection. It reflects really what's happened over the past decades, etc. So, and it's our opinion that it demonstrates, let me call it, I call it the death by 1,000 cuts, but the septic contribution has been small, perhaps per year, but it's accumulating. It's not going anywhere. It's sinking to the bottom of the lake, and it's going to come back. So I would urge you to think of these issues in a long time frame, because once a lake goes bad, it's extreme, especially this size of lake. Forget about it. The effort to recover is, very significant. Now, in Dean and Pocono, the key issues, and Nelson mentioned some of these, the area has a very high groundwater situation, which causes havoc for septic system to operate, which really usually causes public health problems because it's not getting the proper bacterial contamination. There's a healthy number of extremely small lots where you really can't put a code compliant order. The variances that are required are pretty significant. As well as the same situation, the Board of Health has concluded, based upon its work for decades, is that area needs to be sewered as well. And we agree, and on the basis of that, again, is all in the reports. So with that, I will return the microphone to Chris. Thanks for your attention. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So again, a little bit of repetition, but hopefully briefly now. A little bit of project background and the current study areas and how we got here. In 2020, the Candlewood Lake Area Wastewater Management Plan was completed, and it recommended sewer extensions for the Candlewood Peninsula and certain high-density areas adjacent to Candlewood Lake Road. On this map, that's basically the red area. red area and green area. In 2020, there was also a Dean and Pocono Roads wastewater management plan completed that recommended sewer extensions for the Dean and Pocono Road area that's east of this map. And then recently, we also added the Candlewood Lake Club area, the portion that's in Brookfield up here, just to look at how that compares to some of the other areas in the study. Overview of septic systems. As I said before, I'm sure everyone here knows plenty about their septic system, but I'll start with another reference to the letters from the Brookfield Health Department. Did recommend sewer extensions to the WPCA for the areas included in the study, basically the Candlewood Peninsula and the Dean and Pocono Road area. So that was a recommendation of the health department that kind of started some of this work. More than half the septic systems in these study areas are more than 50 years old. Most of them are certainly past their expected useful life. That's not to say that they're all failing right now, but they're no longer in a stage that you could really consider them reliable at age 50 plus. Many lots in the study areas are too small to have code compliant systems. A lot of properties have experienced malfunctioning septics and difficulty upgrading their systems. And in general, the soil and ground conditions in these study areas are not always conducive to nutrient removal in septic systems. So either the groundwater is too high, the lots are too small, bedrock is too high, not ideal conditions for properly functioning septic systems. I'll also note, I'm sure if anybody in the room has been through it, replacing your septic system is no small cost, no easy feat. Drain field replacement might be $10,000, it might be $50,000 if you need to do a mounted system. If you need to replace your tank, it could be $3,000 to $10,000. And that's the kind of thing you don't really have time to plan for. When it fails and you need to replace it, you need to do it pretty much immediately. You have to pay a contractor right away. So it's a hard thing to plan for and a hard thing to deal with. This slide has a lot of words, I know that. I just wanted to put out there some of the pros and cons of sanitary sewer systems. In general, sanitary sewers would improve the lake water quality, reduce the phosphorus discharges specifically to the lake. Also would improve the drinking water source quality of all the wells around or in these study areas.
Where's the study?
Reduce risk of beach closures, elimination of the septic tank responsibilities on the homeowners, no need to replace them, get rid of that concern from your life. Increased property values associated with sanitary sewer service and public utility. Less residential maintenance costs. Sewers and community pump stations would be maintained by the Brookfield WPCA. And grinder pumps, which we'll talk about in a little bit, they have typical lifespans in excess of 10 years, usually much more than that. Gravity sewers, if they're installed, have very little maintenance and very long life cycles, 50 years, 100 years or more. Obviously, there are some cons to every project. Plenty of people have voiced some of those concerns. We understand them. Certainly, construction activity, putting a pipe down the middle of your road is not an easy thing to live with, so there is definitely disruption during construction. Wastewater treatment capacity needs is something we'll talk about on another slide. That's definitely an issue here in Brookfield right now. And then I think the number one con is the cost. Any capital improvement project for the town definitely comes with a cost, and everyone's concerned with that these days. It's a fair concern. So just to talk a little bit again about what we're looking at right now, and again to reiterate, we're in a planning study. This is, decisions have not been made. We're trying to get to a point where we have good information to help the WPCA and the town make decisions. We are summarizing the current flows through the Brookfield system and the potential new flows from these study areas as well as from other developments that may happen in town. Looking at existing treatment facilities and new in-town treatment options. There are some capacity limitations currently with where the wastewater currently flows. So expanding the system is not an easy thing to deal with. There's not an easy answer there. We also did some geotechnical explorations in the study area to identify, things that we knew existed, but we didn't necessarily know always where. Where is there shallow bedrock? Where is there high groundwater? Try to quantify some of those ground conditions a little bit better. And we are looking at alternatives analysis for sewers. So, the 4 bullets here, are kind of the 4 buckets of how you could design a sewer system for these areas. The first bullet here, these are in no order. The first bullet is septic tank, effluent pumping, and gravity systems. I know a lot of people have read about them because they are mentioned in the prior reports. That is one option. It has not been determined yet. It's on here because it's still an option in consideration. We're trying to look at everything and make sure that we do a comprehensive report here and look at all the feasible options. Other options that we're looking at are typical, what you would normally think of for a collection system. So gravity sewers and pumping stations throughout the project area where needed, pumping stations at low points, basically, that would be maintained by the WPCA. It's also an option to sometimes have a mix of gravity sewers and pumping stations, and some areas where homes have individual pumps to try to get up to a gravity sewer that's shallower than their home. And then we're also looking at an option that might have a majority of individual grinder pumps, so whole blocks that might have a whole bunch of pumps on them. We'll talk about them a little bit more in the following slide. The first one, again, septic tank, effluent pumping, gravity systems, the step seg systems were presented in some of those prior reports because it can be a low-cost option. And it's something that we have to look at in the range of capital cost planning. In this configuration, existing septic tanks would be maintained on the properties for solids, and then small diameter, fairly shallow sewers would be constructed in the streets. And there still would be some pumping stations in some of the communities depending on how the system laid out. Again, gravity sewers and Brookfield WPCA pumping stations. Gravity sewers, once they're in the ground, they just generally work for a really long time. You don't have to do a whole lot with them, so that's a big pro. But they can certainly be very expensive to construct, especially if you've got shallow bedrock or shallow groundwater and you're looking at some deep pipes. So this option also requires several pumping stations throughout these study areas, and it's not necessarily easy to find a good home for those that works technically and also makes the neighbors happy. So that is one option that's a traditional option. The third bullet is a bit of a twist on that. So, basically gravity system with Brookfield WPCA pumping stations. But in some areas where you might have really deep gravity sewers, if you were to serve everybody by gravity, throw in 5 or 10 or 20 individual grinder pumps on some of the houses, some of the low-lying houses. You might be able to make the whole sewer system 10 feet shallower if you do something like that, which can save some cost. So we're looking literally at each street to see where it might make sense to do something like that. And then the last one, majority individual grinder pumps. So a grinder pump is basically where the wastewater would leave your house, and instead of flowing by gravity into the street, it would flow into a little can, almost like a garbage can buried in your lawn with a pump in it, and pump up to a sewer. There might be whole blocks where it makes sense to do individual grinder pumps. So that's something that's, it's an option. It's kind of an alternative to the step seg system to try to keep things shallower and smaller diameter pipe. So, again, these are 4 options. In the end, the ultimate recommendation here, if the project is to go forward, is probably going to have some combination of 2 or 3 of these bullets. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. I'm sure everybody here knows the topography of this area and the ground conditions are challenging. It's not as simple as just putting a pipe in the road and carrying the wastewater away.
Where's the sewer option of keeping your own septic?
So we should be taking questions now, but ultimately this project has not been voted on yet. So the option to keep your own septic would stay if the project doesn't move forward.
Wait, but that's not up there.
So
no action.
Right, no action alternative, right. So what we're working towards is a cost analysis of those feasible alternatives. So again, like I mentioned, deep gravity sewers are expensive to install, but once they're in, they're in. So where might it make sense to have deeper sewers to avoid a pumping station? Areas of shallow bedrock and groundwater complicate construction and raise construction costs. Again, looking at the cost of individual pumps in some areas versus another Brookfield WPCA community pumping station. I also want to mention the concept of capital costs versus long-term maintenance costs. Everybody's going to think about initially the capital cost of the project and is it palatable? Is it affordable? but every time you're building new infrastructure, there are long-term maintenance costs. So, pump stations and grinder pumps cost more to maintain than gravity sewers. So that's why the deep gravity sewers are still on the table and being looked at right now. And recommendations for the project, what's going to come out of this planning phase, we'll have some recommendations for what we think is feasible and makes sense. And they'll be based on a combination of cost and public input. So that's why we're interested in people's opinions and thoughts and understanding the considerations of the community. But we'll be weighing that against the technical feasibility and the costs of the project. And ultimately, to get to an implementation phase, if this project is to go forward, at the conclusion of the planning study, the Brookfield WPCA would make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and the Planning Commission. Do they think that this project is something that should be pursued by the town? And if that recommendation is yes, all the backup and phasing of the project would be presented. Ultimately, it would have to go to town meeting and a referendum vote that would be required before the appropriation of funds is authorized. So, again, this is a planning study. The decisions have not been made. We're looking at the information that we have to try to make good recommendations at this time. A quick note on project financing. I know it's certainly number one in everybody's book, like how would any project be implemented. A project of this type would be eligible for Connecticut Deep Clean Water Fund, which is typically a 20% grant and a low interest loan to eventually loan for the balance of it. There would be ongoing investigation into other grant opportunities, anything that could be found to lower that initial capital cost for the town. Grant programs are always changing. Sometimes the state has steep grants. There are federal programs. It's always changing. So depending on when this project may move forward, we would look at every opportunity available at that point in time. And then the remainder of the project would be paid for, the net cost of the project would be paid for by benefit assessments on the properties that are being approved by sewer service. Historically in Brookfield, those benefit assessments are less than 10% of the assessed value. That cost model is being evaluated for this project. It's something that the WPCA is looking at. It's possible that method might be modified to possibly include property acreage or frontage, or something like the number of building units and the use of the parcel. That's similar to what the town does for water main benefit assessments. So that that 10% assessment is not necessarily a done deal at this point in time for this project. And again, that's the maximum. 10% is the maximum. It's not the standard. Basically, you take the cost of the project, subtract the grants, and figure out what it would be if it's divided up against the users. So, upcoming, what are we really looking at here? We're going to complete this analysis, look at all those alternatives literally on every street in the study area. Also look at the boundaries of the study area. Do they make sense? Are these the right boundaries? Flows and treatment options. Where can all this additional flow go? Can it go to Danbury? Can it go to another neighboring town? Do we have to look at a plant within Brookfield to handle this new flow or any other development needs in Brookfield? Cost analysis, again, consideration of the public input from tonight, from future meetings, from questions that have already been received. And we expect that we would have some preliminary recommendations and another meeting sometime in the spring. I think it's going to be a long winter of looking at each house and each street on maps and trying to make recommendations and then be more prepared to answer more specific questions several months from now in the spring. So with that, we do have a public comment time. The WPCA has received, hundreds of questions, I believe, in the last few weeks at this point, and they've published a living document on their website already with, I think everything that was received through a few days ago is already up there with preliminary responses. We are calling it a living document. We'll add to it when new questions come in. Some of the answers might be, they're vague at this point because decisions haven't been made, so we'll try to keep that updated. We do have a summary of responses to kind of the themes of the questions that were received. I think those were those handed out. Those available to be handed out, and we can go through those quickly to try to address what I think are, the overall themes of what many of the concerns are. And then after that, we can go to a public comment period, and Greg will moderate that. But do you want to go through that? So thank you for listening and keeping your ears open.
Good job.
Okay, the only thing between your turn to talk and our turn to listen is just a couple more minutes, so just bear with me. So as Christy mentioned, we did, I think the final tally was 260 questions. Looks like there's a little more than 260 people here, so there could be more questions still to come, I'm guessing. But the answers, the preliminary answers, like she mentioned, are up on the website. They're available for you to go through. We will continue to update them. Most of them have an answer on them that will be updated. Some of them still need an answer. But the handout is just what I wanted to talk through first, because what we went through is we thought that a lot of them fit in certain categories. And, so that when you come up, you can understand that this is where we were when we put them into these categories. So the first one is related to the health of the lake and drinking water. And this is the only one I'm going to actually read, but given the density of homes in Brookfield near Candlewood Lake, the intent of this project was to evaluate alternatives for maintaining or improving the precious water resources for generations to come. I don't think anybody here would argue that you want to maintain Candlewood Lake and all the water resources within Brookfield. The question is the project needed? How much is it going to cost and all of those things? But I would imagine that, like the first select woman said earlier, if we did a show of hands, how many people want to preserve Candlewood Lake for generations to come? Can I get a show of hands? Okay. So the scope, Christy,
at any cost.
We understand.
Does anybody need a handout?
The scope of the project Christy went through, there will be a comment period just in 2 minutes if you just bear with me. The schedule Christy went over, we did get a 55% planning grant for the efforts today, as Nelson mentioned. We have a 55% grant for the efforts that are going on now. So 45% is the only portion that is being borne right now by Brookfield, so that is tremendous, and that's being funded by Connecticut DEP, and they are in full support of this project. And as Christy mentioned, we will have a lot more answers come the spring. We certainly will have another public meeting, and nothing will move forward until there ultimately would be a referendum vote to in fact move the full project forward. There was a lot of questions, I think 3 pages of questions on the cost estimate. Trust me, we know that COVID happened. We know that inflation is going on. We know that the material costs are up. We know that all of these things are happening. The Lombardo estimates was before all of that occurred. We certainly are updating the alternatives now. We certainly will update the cost estimates, and in the spring when we present it to you, we'll have the current cost estimates for the current alternatives. There was a lot of talk about restoration. Now this is interesting because there was talks about costs, about it costing so much. But then there was comments about, are you going to do full road reconstruction? The cheapest thing to do would be to just do a trench patch, right? That'd be the cheapest alternative. This is not a road reconstruction project, but if what the community wanted was to at the same time get their road repaired, it probably would be a better overall solution, but it might be a more expensive solution. But those are the things that we can talk about through future public meetings. There was a lot of talk about construction means and methods. We are nowhere near this right now. We're only in the planning phase, and we don't know if we'll be moving forward with design or not, but certainly we will put the pipes below the frost line. We certainly will use the proper bedding material. We certainly will make sure that trenches will be maintained so that kids don't fall in them, that, at night they will be secured. We certainly will make sure that people have access to the houses. These are all standard things in construction with pipeline. We've built plenty of pipes in plenty of towns, and this would be no different. On the septic reuse, Christy mentioned that. Certainly, I think she went through that pretty detailed. There was a lot of questions on, maintaining the existing septic system after this project, if it was built. We are evaluating other alternatives to that right now, and we will present them all to you in the spring. On the wastewater treatment and discharge capacity, we are aware of the situation. We are currently seeking out with Danbury and Milford options to send wastewater there, and there obviously is options for an in-town wastewater treatment plant. We don't have the answers to those right now, but again, we hope to have them come the spring when we are presenting this to you again. On pumping stations, we don't know the locations. It all depends on, like Christy said, the layout. There's a give and a take. More gravity sewers is the less grinder pumps, the individual pumps you need in your house, but it means that we probably need to do a pump station in the street that would be owned and operated by the WPCA. And we certainly would want to site them in a place that is not an eyesore. We can make them aesthetically pleasing, and they would have odor control systems. On final design and construction, we are not there right now. There would be a future phase after a favorable referendum if that was to occur. It would likely have multiple design and construction contracts. It would be over several years. And even if everything went as smoothly as we possibly could imagine and passed the vote, we're still looking 2-3 years away before any construction would occur. As to grant funding, the WPCA is always, Nelson is the champion of, he met with Commissioner Bowden to try to get infrastructure money for this project. He's constantly looking for opportunities for grant funding. Clearly, if we could increase that 20% grant to something higher through the infrastructure bill, through the community support, through people going to DEP or going to your state legislatures, if we can get money, more money for grant, then the cost for the project goes down for the entire community, and then you still get the benefit of preserving the lake. And I think that would probably be one of the best things for everyone. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Greg, and he's going to emcee the public comment period.
All right, so before we start on public comment, it's 7 minutes after 8. How many people are going to have a public comment, would like to make a public comment, just by show of hands? So we've got maybe 2 dozen, all right? You want to keep going, or you want to break? Keep going. Okay, so let's set some ground rules for the public comment. So we're all kind of going by the same set of rules here. As was previously said, 260 questions have already been asked. The answers, as best we know them today, are on the WPCA website. You probably maybe haven't had a chance to read those questions or answers, but what we don't want to do is repeat questions more than once tonight. So if somebody asks the question, please don't come back up for respectful of everyone's time to ask the same question again. Any questions? So what we're going to do is kind of give a 3-minute limit, and I would ask all the speakers to come along this aisle and just kind of stand in queue, and you'll come up one at a time at the podium. And if you can give your name and address, Brookfield address. If you're not a Brookfield resident, could you please just state your affiliation? You're here from another town representing so-and-so or whatever. We'd appreciate knowing that. We're not going to, this isn't a public debate or a Q&A. These are public comments. So everyone here at the table is going to be listening carefully to your questions or comments. After all the questions are asked, we'll get up one at a time, and they'll each respond to the ones that are kind of in their area of expertise. So across the table, they'll stand up, they'll introduce themselves again, and they'll make general responses to the questions or comments that you all made over these next 20 minutes or so. So if that works for everybody, if we can't get to some questions tonight because we're going to be hitting 10 o'clock, I don't think we're going to do it. You can email your questions to the email address that Christy showed, or you can call them in, and that living document she talked about will be updated, I bet more than once over the next couple of weeks. So with that, if we're ready for public comment, can you please come along the, kind of queue up along that side aisle? And name and address, and 3 minutes per speaker max, please.
Hi, my name is Angelo Valdana. I'm South Lake Shore Drive in Candlewood Shores.
Closer to the mic, please.
Yes, okay. I have a lot of questions and comments. It's not going to be 3 minutes. I'll just try to hit highlights. But I disagree, or not disagree, but I found many of the statements made earlier just factually incorrect. And if we had the time, I would point them out, but we don't have that time. Let me just start off with just one. Ms. Lombardo, the lake, your data on one of your reports show that it's less than one part per billion phosphorus. So I don't see how you come to your conclusions. The main comment I would want to make is I don't know if anybody here has looked at a lake that has been in trouble like Bantam Lake. Is anyone familiar with that? Okay, so why wasn't that process taken care of, followed? Rather than the health department, 2 individuals writing a letter saying that they believe that septic systems were causing pollution, we need sewers, you hire a consultant who's, with all due respect, primarily involved with sewers and waste management. I looked at your website, the projects. And Bantam Lake followed a process that I think was very well thought out. They looked at all sources of pollution. They looked at runoff, they looked at agricultural, they looked at wildlife, they looked at erosion. There were 9 points in their plan. When they came through that plan, and they also looked at septic systems, you should look at the report. I think it'll conclude, everybody can look at it, it's on the DEEP website. Septics were less than 1% of the potential problem. Their main problems was runoff in that lake, and that's what they're addressing. So I don't know why this commission jumped right away that there was a problem when we didn't see a problem, and then that solution, it's a solution in search of a problem. Because sewers, if there was truly a problem with the lake, every single person here would be concerned and try to fix it. But I don't think that's the case. And the person from the Candlewood Lake Authority himself said this is a complex issue. It's not sewers. If you remove the septic systems, you're not going to have a major impact on the lake. You're just not. Runoffs, fertilizers, there's a lot of other things. The Housatonic River dumps into the lake. No one's tested Housatonic River. You didn't test for chlorophyll A, which is one of the problems that potentially causes the lake. So there are so many defects with this study, and so many conclusions that were not based on facts at all, that I just question why this authority jumped to sewers as a solution. Please answer those questions, because it's very significant. If you could show us that the lake was seriously polluted and that septics were the cause, not other sources which weren't looked at, I think everybody here would be very concerned about that. But we're not convinced that that's the case. So I would urge you to look at that carefully, the Bantam Lake study, and answer us why it wasn't followed and how you accounted for other sources of pollution and concluded that all of a sudden it's septic systems that are the problem. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Deirdre Corey. I'm at 57 Skyline Drive. I just kind of have a series of questions that you'll take note of and hopefully answer at some point. Do any other towns that border Candlewood Lake have sewer for their lake properties? Will Brookfield, if we do build a plant, will we potentially sell our capacity to other towns? Has First Light or Candlewood Lake Authority or any other group initiated discussions for a cross-town kind of coordinated approach for sewer to achieve economies of scale? To the previous gentleman's point, has anyone addressed a study of when you show those 2 pictures in both, whichever year, the first year and the second year, Housatonic was solid red, and that's what dumps in through First Light into our lake. So why aren't we studying that? On the other image that you had, the red properties, and specifically the peninsula, that I'm assuming is going to be like the kind of the mandated area that we'll have to have sewer put in. I'm wondering if I and others in the public may have a spreadsheet copy of those specifically identified properties on that list. And by my take of looking at that, it looks like there were many properties that are near and bordering the lake that are not on the red, and yet there was red as far as pollution or runoff near their properties. Why aren't they in there? They need to share the burden. Is there any plan to address specifically the financial burden for residents that have fixed incomes? Because this will be like a mortgage for many people. At $40,000, 10% of the home value, that's very high. Hypothetically, if the Candlewood Shores Tax District, which owns their own roads, should say no, you don't have access to our roads, what could or would the WPCA do? Would you consider eminent domain, a taking, paying for that? As far as who benefits, we're assuming, okay, lake quality, we all want a good lake. But has anyone really looked at, why aren't we looking at everyone who benefits, everyone who uses the lake all over the state? People from all over the state come to our lake. People from New York come to our lake, other towns who use the lake and border the lake. I'm wondering who might benefit. Maybe the town of Brookfield coffers. I really don't know this. I'm just speculating if we could start to sell capacity. And that's a good thing for the town, but not when it's just on my burden on my specific property. When you talked about the, if we do a WPCA plant, then all of Brookfield residents would benefit from access to more sewer capacity without having to pay the assessment. Vacant properties along the corridor for the sewer, they're going to really benefit from this. They're going to have the ability to build multifamily affordable housing when they have sewer capacity. Has any conflict of interest study been done on those owners? Last comment, thank you. The 4 alternatives that were on your list, and someone did point out, it seems like you need a number 5, and you need to kind of not just say no action, but actually specifically do a cost analysis of why don't we identify any problems with failing sewers, or septics, I'm sorry, and there are ways to do, with those the sewer on smaller properties. Why don't we do a very specific analysis on just maintaining the septics that we have? Because many of them are not good. Thank you very much.
I live in the best neighborhood. I got the smartest neighbors. My name is Todd Dawson. I live on North Lakeshore Drive in Brookfield. I have 2 questions, not really profound statements like Deirdre did, but can we change over to that aerial picture slide of the blue water lake versus the phosphorus water lake? Would that be possible? I just have a question about that one image. And I think it speaks to the whole concept of, gee, what is this phosphorus problem? So I'm looking here at the phosphorus on the reservoir on Route 37. That's a reservoir, that's a watershed area that's protected, and no septic, no fertilizer, no nothing is supposed to run into that. And it's as dry as Candlewood. And so the question for me is, where is that phosphorus coming from? And do we really have a Candlewood Lake sewage septic problem? Or do we just have a summertime water problem and the phosphorus rears its ugly head when August comes around? I don't know, that's my question. My second question is, I've been in Candlewood Shores now for 28 years. I know the previous owners and the previous owners and the previous owners of my house. And I know that we've visited the whole question of pump-up systems. I live on the lake front, so I live below the street grade. And we visited this 50 years ago. Should we have sewers and should we pump up? Nobody believed that you could pump poop up a hill and get it into a sewer line. And so it was soundly defeated 50 years ago. Well, now we know that it can happen. It's a feasible, plausible, practical solution. But why are we only pumping 1/2 of our sewage? Why, if we're going to pump out of our yards and get all of the stuff away from our houses, why are we not pumping solid waste along with the liquid waste?
Hello, my name is Gail Strickler. I live on Arrowhead Road in Arrowhead Point. I have lived here for 39 years. Luckily, Deirdre asked most of my questions, but I have 2 points that I want to reiterate. One of them she alluded to slightly, which is the idea that we've been told several times tonight that there are multiple septics that are failing along the lake. Well, let's repair them. Let's take a fund. Let's come up with engineered septic, which we all know is possible now, and make those compliant. To tell me they're not compliant, so I should literally dig up all of our streets, cost me $100,000, etc., just seems absolutely insane. Second of all, I really wonder what we are doing here without the people of New Fairfield, Danbury. Of the lake, and we're here being told we're literally going to mortgage our houses when the rest of the lake isn't even represented. This is insanity. Right. This is not that is Brookfield. So the idea that all of us, that I and my neighbors are here worrying about the value of our homes, to say nothing, by the way, of if this happens, what happens to the value of your waterfront home or your lake property home versus the properties in New Fairfield and New Milford and Sherman that aren't going to have their streets dug up, and aren't going to have to mortgage their houses. So not only can you live through this, pay for it, you can also watch the value of your house go down.
And you pay less taxes.
That's all I have.
So there you go.
John Upler, Longview Drive. I'll be very brief. I just have a question about stormwater. We keep talking about septic tanks, septic fields. What's the parts per billion for the phosphorus levels? Have you studied that? And have you discussed, instead of trying to take care of the septic problem, just worry about the stormwater problem, runoff? Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Mono, 7 Longview Drive. I've lived there for 55 years and 7 months. I gotta say, that was a really good map, except for one thing, you only show up from a year apart. What was the water like 50 years ago, 40 years ago? I remember, because I was there, that every summer, Candlewood Lake would get so choked with algae and Eurasian milfoil and all sorts of plant life that you couldn't even operate a boat in large sections of the lake. Now it's clear as a bell. Okay, that's one thing I noticed. Second, it's very interesting. You guys at the engineering, septic engineering, you didn't even have the alternative for, as you said, repairing septics, ameliorating, ending fertilization on the lake. It was all just septic. So you'd have to hit us with, as I said, $40,000 a new mortgage on our lake, or on our properties, correction. But doing lower cost things to ameliorate the issues that there was, like I get, but do we need them? I'm not even sure we need that because, as I said, the lake is better today than it was 40 years ago. Not worse, better, much better.
Good evening. My name is Barry Bernstein. I'm actually up here from Nashville, Tennessee to visit my daughter at 136 North Lake Shore Drive. A couple of comments, technical comments on the lake diagram you put up. The blue side looked like it was about 0 to 2 parts per billion of phosphorus. The green side looked like it was around 20 parts per billion of phosphorus, and that was proffered as an indicator that the change was entirely due to septics, unless I misunderstood that. Well, if you look at your Task 2 report, the needs analysis, the total impact of septics from all the septics around the lake is only 8.8 parts per billion. I think Mr. Lombardo referred to that. Of that, only 2.2 parts per billion is attributable to septics in the study area. So if the total lake septics are only 8.8 parts per billion, how'd you get from 2 parts per billion to 20 or 25 parts per billion? So it's estimated that there's a lot more going on than just the septic contribution of phosphorus. And with respect to the comments from the last gentleman, if you look at the phosphorus data in the report and chlorophyll light data in the report, combined with the Marciano paper, the historical account of water quality changes, the chlorophyll has actually improved quite a bit over time, to the gentleman's point. The epilimbetic total phosphorus is about the same, and the hypolimbetic has improved quite a bit. So that, combined with the fact that there were only 3 septic sampled, there wasn't any upgrading monitoring done. I think there was a comment in some of the board minutes that there were limited funding, which limited the amount of monitoring you could do. You may be making some decisions based on very limited data.
Yes.
My comments.
My name is Dave Slody, I live in Candlewood Lake Road, and I was asking where I live is rock. That's very, very expensive piping. So how would the people afford that? I don't even go to 20 years borrowing money, you know. Would I be able to get any help from the state? I just want to know, because I don't want to lose my house and live in the street. Not at my age.
That's right.
My name is Gail Miner. I live at 18 South Lakeshore Drive. I was here, not here, but at the town hall 4 years ago with pretty much the same people. It was an informative meeting about the sewers, or the potential sewers in the peninsula or the Candlewood Lake area. And it was a question and answer. I was quite thrilled, though, as a Canadian. There was a gentleman there from Waterloo University, and he was an engineer that worked on septic systems on lakefronts that were highly efficient and that you didn't need sewers. And there was all these screens and showing this amazing guy that was an engineer at Waterloo University, and I was like, wow, maybe this sewer thing will go away. Maybe there is another alternative. Maybe there is septic systems that are efficient, that work well on lakefronts, all through Canada, all through the United States, and we don't need sewers. And it was an option that was paid for in this study that we ran out of money. I guess we ran out of money on the study, but anyway, I was looking forward to seeing that guy here again, but he's not here. So just wondering where he went.
Good evening. I'm Joe Vovas. I live at 18 Arrowhead Road. I'm the president of the Arrowhead Homeowners Association. I had a question specifically for Tara to address later. We at the Arrowhead leadership, as well as Candlewood Shores leadership and the 2 other lake associations, Candlewood Orchards and Hickory Hills, did have the opportunity to meet with Nelson and Tara earlier this year, both in February and in April. One of the topics that we raised was the point that was just raised earlier, which is why is Brookfield leading the charge when there are 4 other municipalities around the lake? One of the topics that had come up, which Tara actually alluded to at the front end of this conversation, was unified conversations with those other municipalities, discussions about how we can do this cooperatively. Nothing has been said here tonight in any detail about that. Former Mayor Mark Boughton, who is now the State Economic Development Coordinator, is in charge of doling out over $5.6 billion in IIJA federal infrastructure funds. If you don't think he knows about this lake and what's going on, I'd like to know a little more about the conversations that have been had between the 5 leaders of the municipalities around the lake right now and Mayor Boughton what the potential is for those funds. I don't think there's anyone in this room who would have raised their hand earlier when some gentleman said, you know, who's for saving the lake? Okay, got it. We're all signed up. But who wants to pay for it is a totally different answer. If there is a way to parlay these funds, which are sitting there ready to be earmarked into this project, I'll take some torn up roads for a short period of time and cover virtually the entire thing. So can we please get an update on what the status is? And I really find it strange that this was completely vacant from the conversation here tonight.
My name is John Bevilacqua. I'm at 3 Bayview Drive. So I have a couple of comments and questions. So I came out tonight to be informed, gain knowledge about what's going on, and it seems like I repetitively heard you can find it on the website, which is great, but these meetings are informative and not many of us have a whole lot of time to look on the website. So I would ask that future presentations be thorough and have all the information to us available. We know a whole lot about the lake, that's for sure. We know that the lake has been contaminated by the Housatonic, right? GE and the Industrial Revolution of the 30s and 20s and 40s. And we're pumping that water in every day. Can we bring up the slide, please? The first slide. I mean, Todd made a fantastic comment. So we had the presentation on the slide, and we tried to ask questions when it was up there, but there were really no answers. There's not a lot of data that you were able to give us about when, how come, why. It was 3 days of rain. What year? It's on the website. Exactly. And it was 10 years ago on the website. We're here to be informed today. Not from 10 years ago, not on the website. So when we have our next meeting in 2023, we would expect that the information is here, not on the website. So, and I think I know why the weed growth is down too. Like, I'm not sure that it's a definite, but we had no rain this summer at all, no fertilizers into the lake, right? So the weed growth problem is likely related to the fertilizers. No question. I'm really interested in everything you have to offer, but to me it's a sales pitch. You want to fix the lake if there's a real problem. We don't want to hear a sales pitch. So, and the other question I would have is, when do we plan on having a decision? Like, is this 2025? Like, when? You know, I understand 2023 is a big year, but are we talking 2 or 3 years after that? Because I think a lot of people want to know when they're going to sell their property.
Yeah, my name is Jerry McStravick. I've lived in 50 years. My name is Jerry McStravick. I've lived in Brookfield for 50 years. This lake question has come up a number of times, and nobody really had a solution. But I can tell you for one thing for sure, that the worst thing I think, Terry, we could have done is Brookfield to take charge and be the only town to address this problem. That is not the way Candlewood Lake is 12 or 28 miles long. If there's a problem, let's have the 5 towns take care of it.
Absolutely. Yes.
Before we spend any more money, let's get the towns together on this project, as well as the Chamber of Commerce, because there's a lot of marinas who are making a lot of money, and we're getting a lot of boats from different states coming here using Candlewood Lake and polluting it without any revenue coming back to the towns. Let's get real. I don't know about anybody sitting here, but if I was in a corporation and some division came to me and said, we're taking this on our own without consulting with the other divisions or the other towns, I'd say it's bizarre. Spending our money when when the Candlewood Lake is 28 miles long and it's a regional problem and in fact a Connecticut problem. I think the governor should get involved. This is a real serious situation. And I can tell you, every action has a consequence. So be careful to go forward with something that may be ill-advised. I think I heard the man from Candlewood Lake Authority said, there's no guarantee if we do this, it's going to improve the lake at all. Now, if I was at the board of directors and somebody said, well, what was the condition of the lake 50 years ago compared to now? And if the results were 10 times better, then I'd say, what are we doing it for? So I think we have to start digging into these details quite more before we spend any more money. Thank you.
Hi, Scott Hartman, Arrowhead Road. We were told tonight that there's a significant buildup of sediment at the bottom of the lake. We were also told that septic systems probably add to that sediment, but it's known to carry over from year to year. Yet, at no point tonight did I hear any discussion of whether dredging that sediment is a feasible solution to this problem, albeit at a much lower cost. Secondly, I would just like to take exception with one point made tonight, that a pump-up system is essentially a garbage can with a pump that grossly underestimates or understates the cost of installing those as well as maintaining those. And I don't think that's fair to homeowners.
Hi, I'm Mark Viserga. I have property in the shores on Candlewood Lake, a couple over there, and a few other properties in the town of Brookfield. Candlewood Lake originally was built as a hydroelectric lake. It wasn't built for recreation. That's just the point I'm putting out there. But what happened to me in Carmel, New York, I had some property, and I had to put a sewer hookup. It cost me $50,000. Every year thereafter, it's $5,000 as a sewer fee. Be careful we don't get hit with that. Yes. I've been told Danbury is at capacity already. So they're talking maybe Danbury. I heard it's at capacity. They can look into that. You ever hear of bait and switch? I feel like they might be asking us to fund maybe another sewer treatment plant that can house all the developments on Federal Road. There's more and more condos, buildings down there. Where are they putting their sewage if Danbury is full? Nobody knows. So maybe we want a new treatment plant somewhere local where the whole town can enjoy it, and we can continue to do that. And not just pin it on everybody and use Candlewood Lake as an scapegoat. And say, you people have to start funding this and start pushing it through the town. Right now is also the worst possible time ever to try to purchase and do something like this with the supply chain in this country and the prices of everything. It would be astronomical. If this is a project that's to be done, which in some ways is not a bad idea to have sewers, but it really should be kicked down the road until this country gets back on its feet.
Bruce Alexander, North Lake Shore Drive in Candlewood Shores. Please excuse my shaky voice, my shaky hands. I have essential tremor. It's just not nerves. As a matter of fact, I've spoken in front of many groups before I had this problem. So I'm used to speaking in front of groups. My big problem with this whole meeting is the format. The format is we all line up, we give our questions out to the audience and the panel, and we don't hear the answers right away to each question. We have to wait till the end, try and remember what the questions were, try and take these people's words that they got all the questions and that they will give us all the answers before 10:30 tonight. I'm sorry, but I can't remember that long. I can't remember what I just said. But the final question I have is, will you please answer all these people's questions? Thank you.
He's a tough act to follow. I'm Adele Bernicki. I'm at 13 Lakeview Drive in the Orchards, and I also have a property in Candlewood Shores. Now, I know they spoke about grants, and it should not be confused. The grant money that they got, 55% paying for this study, and 45% will be on us if this project goes through. But the grants that former Mayor Boughton is overseeing, which is $5.4 million. It's part of the infrastructure, $1 billion. It's part of the Infrastructure and Job Act. This project was already put in for that grant. And out of 100, a score of 100, where 100 means you're going to get the grant, we got like a 6. And so we're not going to get a grant because all the money was spent before it got down to 6. It was spent before it got down to 12. So no one's talking about that. So I think that there's very little chance that we would get any grant money for this project at all, given that they're giving it more to big municipalities or to small rural areas. Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name is Joe Grimes, and I live on Horsesale Road in Brookfield. I have a couple of questions. One is, we've heard that there's 55% of the money for this study came from a grant. I'm assuming that the rest of the money comes from the WPCA. And I don't think the WPCA gets any tax money from our regular tax rolls. Can you tell me if I'm correct or not, Nelson? Which would mean that they're subsidizing the fees from the current users to do a study. I wonder if the current users know that. Number two, I look at the scope of the study, and I think that before you start into the intricacies of how we're going to pump this neighborhood, how we're going to pump that neighborhood, resolve the issue of where the sewer is going to go when we're done. You have given us 3 alternatives. It's going to go to Danbury or go to Milford, or we're going to build our own plant. Before you do any of the rest of this study, settle that question.
Kate Diaz. I live at 43 Berkshire, arguably one of the smallest houses in Candlewood Shores. I've lived there for 2 years. I have a bone of contention with that. I just heard about this project, this everything else, whatever we're calling this. When this road in front of my house was dug up as part of this study. And when we started talking with our neighbors, not very many people knew about it. And to answer the selectwoman's question, I vote at every election. I work the polls. I am an informed citizen. But yet, this is hush, 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 hush. And I happen to be in the red area that's affected. My house, I purchased for $240,000. It was already assessed for more than $100,000. Excellent, great for taxes. What happens when people, young and old, are on fixed incomes and can't afford this? There are so many unanswered questions. I came here like probably everyone here tonight for answers and for an education on this matter. And I feel like we're being sold something that doesn't even seem that beneficial or necessary. We need transparency. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Bruce Goldson, 94 North Lakeshore Drive. And my only comment would be that I believe that the process that you outlined on this project is that at some point, if it's approved by the WPCA and the town selectmen and whoever else has to approve it, it goes to a referendum. And that referendum goes to all of the residents of the town of Brookfield. So if I live outside of this project area and I'm told that this is a great thing to preserve our lake, I'm voting yes. But if I live in the area where I'm affected by it, my vote is less valuable than everybody else's vote. It's just one amongst many. So even though that may be the law, it doesn't seem very moral or ethical for an entire town to vote on a project that is only being assessed to a certain very small group of people for the greater good. So that would be my biggest concern with this project. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Julie Blick. I live at 131 Candlewood Lake Road. I might be the only person here who needs the sewer line in front of my house. I have a very tiny home. I need a bigger septic system. I've had Mr. Grimes out to my property and I live on a ledge. However, my property isn't in the study list of projects. So I'm just wondering if that is flexible. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, Tara, but I do believe that you've been speaking with the first selectmen of the various towns, and the other towns will be involved in this project. It's not just Brookfield paying for it.
I said that.
I work in Fairfield, and I hear
You're here.
that. Oh, you're here.
Okay, any more questions? Ted and I are going to keep going. So what we're going to do next is a couple of things are going to happen. You're going to get responses across the table. We'll let those that are ready to come up tell you again who they are. And every question tonight and answer is going to be uploaded in our Q&A, I believe. So for those that aren't here, you'll get responses that'll be on the website again in writing. So with that, who would like to go first?
Okay, so there's a couple of things that I've been just chomping at the bit to get after, and I'm glad I had another opportunity to speak. Otherwise, I guess I'd have to answer these off the website. But first of all, Governor Lamont paid me a visit a couple of months ago, and I invited him back to the lake specifically.
Excuse me, no disrespect, but 3 minutes. 3 minutes for each question, right?
Okay, I'll keep my comments at 3 minutes if that's your request, sir. Anyway, I was saying Governor Lamont came, I invited him back to the lake, and he has yet to return. On the past referendum, I will say, and I've invited him again several times to remind him that somebody should be paying attention to the lake. Commissioner Dykes being one of them, Commissioner Bowman again. There is a much larger problem that we're all aware of, which is the flow and the capacity to Danbury. New Milford is potentially a bridge too far, it's way up north. Bethel has some excess capacity. Again, Matt Knickerbocker's now departed. I have to wait for his replacement to come on board to even address that. I had lunch with Pete Bass yesterday. He has extra capacity, ma'am. I'm looking for solutions to our problem, which is we have nowhere to send our flow. So, for example, if we were to sewer Miss Blick's house, I'd have nowhere to send it right now. And that's a problem that I've inherited, which I'm working towards. But I want to thank you for volunteering to work the polls and everything, and I appreciate all volunteers across town. If anybody would like to step up and be on any of our boards, commissions, run for elected office, be an appointed official, be assigned to an ad hoc committee. Come on, we need everybody. Volunteers are great and they're really hard to find nowadays. So thank you, ma'am, for your volunteerism to the elections. What I'm getting at is reach out to your elected officials, Governor Lamont being just one of them, and let them know that, we need their help here. Candlewood Lake is the largest lake in Connecticut, and when the IIJA funding for the infrastructure money was first announced, I was the first one to go and say, how do I write that grant? I was on board, ready to go. We're not a deprived community, so we fall to the bottom, okay? And someone earlier had a question about affordable housing, if zoning rules were opened up, and I want to speak quickly to the landscape of the 5 surrounding lake towns, which most of you know. Brookfield has the highest density, right? We have a shoreline that is very, very different from the other 4 towns. New Milford, New Fairfield, Danbury, they have a lot of palisades. There aren't a lot of homes crowding the shoreline. We have acreage and mileage of a very, very different landscape. We have 3 restaurants, 3 marinas. We have the Shores Peninsula that jets out into the lake. We have just a very, very different, complex kind of problem set than these other surrounding towns. And I have been working with the other elected officials. Excuse me? When I was a child, even though there was more milfoil, I would argue that it was cleaner. Just because there's no milfoil doesn't mean that it's cleaner. So I'm not a scientist, I don't know. As I said when I spoke earlier, I'm trying to learn myself.
Let her talk.
Yes, I would agree we do need data for that. And there was a gentleman who mentioned about, I forget what his comment was, but I was thinking, about the voting, going to referendum. I think about our form of government, which I alluded to earlier, town meeting form of government. For school security, which is important to many, many families across town, to others it's very insignificant. But for the 200 people who showed up that night, the vote was split by 18 votes. So, that's our form of government. How do we change that? I'm kind of exploring those options myself, which is why I'm encouraging people to get involved. If you feel very strongly about a matter, please stand by your convictions and stay engaged and stay informed. To someone else's point about transparency, it's very, very hard to communicate across the board. To send mailers out, I don't know, how much did it cost the WPCA to send the mailers to all these homes just for this meeting? A couple $1,000s? When I was campaigning, it cost tens of thousands of dollars to send a mailer to 18,000 households, or 18,000 families, over 8,000 households. I have a website where I try to convey. I maintain my own social media site on Facebook if you want to follow me. Every month I contribute to the spotlight that you can sign up for on the website. Again, I respond to every constituent's inquiry. Please feel free to email me, call the office. I will return your phone call. Come visit me. I don't know how much more transparent I can be when I'm trying to be fiscally responsible, and I can't afford a chief of staff. I can't afford a PR. If somebody wants to run against me and try to do my job next year, come on. I also want to mention to the grant. I personally wrote a grant through Senator Murphy's office to try to get funding for our dilapidated 1986 communication system that fortunately was passed in the referendum. It's going to cost us about $6 million. Senator Murphy's office denied us a single penny. I'm trying to speak to the point about the grant because someone else mentioned and asked about the grant money. It's very unlikely that we will get the grant money we need to address this situation. If anybody has any recommended solutions, please bring them forward, and I'm happy to discuss anything, and I look forward to recommended solutions. But again, I'm also in the learning process, and I understand your angst. That's all I can say.
Anybody else want to come up? You have a few other questions yet? Nelson?
Well, a couple things. But we're just pursuing this as a due diligence in order to do the I'll be sure that we have a good environment for the future. But a couple things. One is that we had the biggest lake in New Jersey, Lake Hopatcong, had sort of the same situation. A lot of houses along the lake. And in 2019, it was a complete disaster. It turned to the cyanoalgae. If a dog went in the water, came out, licked its fur, it would die. And so they couldn't let anybody in the water, and as a result, anybody relying on rentals to pay the mortgages went belly up, and businesses shuttered. And anyway, that story's on the website. It's all over. It's all over the Lake Hopatcong website. Anyway, what happened was when they didn't use the lake for a year, and the sewers weren't active, the lake cleaned up, and it was able to be used the following year. In Lake Kenosha, they sewered a trailer park right along the lake there, and when they did that, the lake went from turbid to, you could see the bottom, just about. So anyway, it was, these are examples of what happens when you remove the septic from going into the lake. As far as the other towns are concerned, it's difficult because it's a multi-jurisdictional lake. There's Candlewood Lake Authority, the First Light, there's the 5 towns, and there's others that have jurisdiction over the lake, Connecticut Deep, and so to get everybody together, it's not so easy. So we're working those angles, but we could let the lake go. Okay. So what happens is, say 8 years from now the lake goes really south. We're going to say, well, why didn't we do anything about it? Well, we tried, you know. So anyway, this is the as the WPCA is made up of, we're not paying volunteers. We're just volunteering in order to pursue the problem. And it seemed to make the most sense at this point, and so that's why we're going through the whole grant thing, the whole study thing, in order to see if we can make a difference. We do have connections in Hartford, so we're not done yet. Anyway, they had Larry had some insights into Bantam Lake. He's working with that.
Good evening, folks. Larry Marsicano, formerly the director of the Candlewood Lake Authority, and now with a company called Aquatic Ecosystem Research. And I've been on the lake since the late 70s, so I'm pretty vested myself in with the health of the lake. I do want to start really quickly sharing something I shared with the first select woman. This is a report from 1983. When the state was actually doing lots of work in the big lakes. And it says, the results are presented in the field. Septic system inputs, approximately 20% of the annual phosphorus load were estimated by assuming 90% of the phosphorus from the 4,500 dwellings along the shoreline would be retained by the soil. So we're not talking about a new problem. We're talking about a problem we've known about for over 40 years. And later on in this report, which I promised to share with the first selectwoman, it does talk about the soils. And we're basically on the ledge. You know, our soils are not the greatest for septic systems. There was a question about other septic systems, other sewers in the Candlewood watershed. The answer is yes. Down in Danbury, there's a small community that was tied into the sewer system. I think this was in the 90s, because they were having a problem with the E. coli bacteria at the Danbury Town Beach, which they closed for the entire year, for the entire season. So there is one portion of the watershed that is sewered. There was a question regarding Bantam Lake, and I'm very familiar with that project. The gentleman was talking about a TMDL study that the state performed, total maximum daily loading study. And a lot of that was watershed based. That's what you do in a TMDL study. you figure out where all, in this case, the phosphorus is coming from. 30% of the phosphorus budget in that lake is the latency phosphorus, the stuff that's coming back up from the sediments, which accumulates over time. So all the phosphorus, whether it's from the septic systems, whether it's from the runoff, wherever it's coming from, once it gets into the lake, it stays in the lake and just recycles from the bottom. Someone mentioned dredging that out. Well, you would have to probably dredge somewhere in the vicinity of 4,000 acres, because that's how much of the bottom has the conditions during the summer to shed that phosphorus through the sediments. There was a lot of questions regarding the history of the water quality of the lake, and there was really good information about that. We know, for instance, the lake was created back in the late 20s, actually saw improvement in the water quality for the first 30 years, 20 to 30 years. 1950-ish, we saw the lake started to go the other way. And of course, that ties directly with the growth in our 5 towns. There's no denying it. The correlation is very clear. The area grew, the lake became popular, and the water quality started to deteriorate. And it really deteriorated at a pretty high rate up to about the late 70s, early 80s. And then it started to change in some perspective. And someone mentioned the Marsicano paper, which I was flattered that they mentioned, and where we showed that chlorophyll and phosphorus levels over that, I think it was a 25-year period, had actually gone down a little bit. It's true. But keep in mind that we don't have to go too far back. When we had an algae bloom on that lake in 2013, that was of epic proportions. We're seeing other factors. It's not just the phosphorus. It's very dynamic. It's a lot of variables that cause these blooms, and some of them we can't control. So we have some things we can control, like how much phosphorus gets to the lake, and we have things we can't control. So let me take one more quick peek at my notes. A lot of really good questions. A lot of people are thinking out there. The Housatonic River, there is data on the Housatonic River. So they pump up from the Housatonic at the north end of Lake Lulanota. Brian, am I correct? So Lake Lulanota has really poor water quality, but they're getting a lot of septic influence from the sewage treatment plant in Danbury. So that's why Lulanota was really red on the map, but above it, it's not so bad. But there's good data, and the phosphorus levels are not all that different in the river than they are in the lake. So, all right. Yeah, okay. You're right. So this kind of technology is based on modeling of satellite images. So this is just one line of evidence that you have some issues going on. So you try to use as many lines of evidence as you can.
And we get our water from that river. We get our water from that river.
You do. And if you look at the data, that is collected on the phosphorus levels in the Housatonic River, they're not all that much different than what are in Candlewood now.
And that wouldn't be a surprise because it's the river that's giving us a lot of that phosphorus.
Well, you're getting some of the water. I mean, the turnover rate in Candlewood is not all that fast. It doesn't. You're getting maybe a third of the volume of the lake that's recharged every year. So, yeah, you can't deny that there's phosphorus coming through the sediments. That's just that's not like You know, we're not guessing on that. It is what it is.
When you get 60 parts per billion from the river, I mean,
For the Housatonic, no, you can't. You can't. Because the volume of water they're pumping in and out is astronomical. You just, you know, the sediment alone is really high.
Why would our septic system change that number then? If our volume is nothing compared to their 1/3?
It would be it would be a contribution to improving things. So, well, I don't know. So they said their calculations is they were saying 9 parts per billion, right? So
Which is one part per billion is 1 drop for 500 barrels.
So the phosphorus levels in Candlewood, Neil, correct me if I'm right, probably on average of 18, 19. So parts per billion in the water, at the surface where the algae are growing, not at the bottom where it gets really high, but at the surface, right? So if you drop that by 8 or 9, you're now close to 10. So it would make, now, you know, it would be watershed wide, but it would have an impact on the future of the lake.
Why don't you do what Bantam Lake did, and they concluded the septics were negligible, almost negligible.
Bantam Lake is a completely, they do not have the level of development around that lake like we have. Half that lake, half the watershed of that lake is the White Memorial Conservation Area.
But you have to look at every possible source of pollution.
Oh, I get it, and they did. Yep, and there's big differences. You know, so the watershed of Bantam is enormous compared to the watershed of Candlewood. The watershed of Candlewood, even though it's a big area, it's small relative to the size of the lake, whereas Bantam has a watershed that's vastly bigger than the size of the lake. So they do get a lot of contribution from the watershed.
But their plan was to look at all sources.
They did.
We did not do that.
So, and ironically, I mentioned the latency phosphorus, right, from the bottom, where the phosphorus accumulates from all the stuff that comes in and just recycles, right? The other source was a sewage treatment plant that was in one of the communities that developed it, the plant, to protect their lake, Woodridge Lake. So they pumped out their sewage, and I think they drained into like one of the Bantam River, and that ended up, you know, contaminating Bantam Lake. So.
What about the direct human waste going into the lake from fishing tournaments? I mean, I've seen people eliminate the lake in front of my house. The Pine Island.
Yeah, you know,
What
yep.
about
Nothing considered.
150 people on Sand Island.
you know, that.
So you're suggesting that
That some of these measures that you're taking that have to do with human waste might not be from our septic system. It might be from the direct human waste going into that place.
well, that's contributing too, certainly.
That could be the
But it doesn't mean that your septic systems aren't contributing either, right?
You know what? If I stopped driving a car, it would be a great thing for the environment, but how much of a difference is it going to make if one person stops driving a car? That's what we're talking about here.
We're not talking about one person's house, though.
Where there are how many people, nobody pays Brookfield or the Lake Authority or anything else for the usage of that lake. And we're all going to take care of it by putting sewers in our home.
Okay, we have some more responses to questions that were asked before. So, Pia, or anybody else want to come up?
I'd like to say something about what
We still have questions to answer. Hold on. Let's answer the question.
Hold on to what he just said. He's kind of told things halfway. When he talked about Danbury running the sewer line to correct their problem of pollution at the town beach, he was correct. They corrected it in one neighborhood. The negative result was a zoning change. There's 2 3-story high-rise condominiums now at the lake. They don't put septic into the lake, but that's the change you get with zoning when you sewer an area. The other thing he said was that the pollution in Lake Nona is caused by the Danbury sewer plant. So what you're saying in effect is our sewage now that we send to Danbury is polluting Lake Nona. Maybe that's a problem that should be corrected before we add to that.
Well, they have a
they have they're supposed to be upgrading that system.
Right, but in the summertime, more than half the flow of the Still River is from the sewage plant. And now we're talking about putting a plant in Brookfield, and that's the only place we have to put it. Can that river take that? Do you have any idea? Okay.
Okay, we're still answering questions from an hour ago, so anyone want to come up? Pio?
Yes, Pio Lombardo again. Thank you for all these comments. I just had 2 questions that I wanted to respond to. One of them, a lady asked this or made the commentary about the professor from Waterloo. That's the professor that was working with us on the project that measured the phosphorus removal levels throughout the system. So, and he's been a colleague with us for over 25 years. So, but to your point regarding measuring or what's the other factors in the lake that are affecting the water quality. This project, it's a wastewater management project. And the way that we configured it is that we made best estimates as possible about the delta that septic's influence. Rather than trying to deal with the entire lake, which is a very complicated and long, expensive process, we said, okay, we're not going to be the big picture folks, but we can estimate what the delta is caused by septic systems based upon this, and it's all very scientifically pretty strong.
I don't mean to criticize you, that you don't know. All I meant to say is that you came in and looked at septic system and sewer. You didn't look at the big picture, which is what you're saying. And I agree with you.
Yeah, that wasn't our job.
I understand that. That's, I'm not
Wasn't our
criticizing.
job. As well as, that's not the WPCA's job.
WPCA's job is sewers and
WPCA's job here was wastewater management, not sewage, wastewater management. How is wastewater management properly performed from public health and environmental impact perspectives? Well, we're not talking about the wastewater. This project is talking about the wastewater issues that it has control over. The impact on the lake is one piece of the puzzle, and we've defined that. So we did look at the lake. But again, the way one looks at it, and I've been doing this for a long time, okay? We published a lot. Okay? So, and I built a lot of unique systems. And we know what the delta is. That's what you should be concerned about. Because the delta is what we have control on to do something about it. So, admittedly, yeah, there should be a lake-wide study, and I believe the Candlewood Lake Authority is planning on doing that in the coming years. Okay? But that's not the focus of this effort. The focus on this effort is how is wastewater managed properly?
Can I just ask one point? Did you mention the delta of storm runoff and fertilizer and wads and other things?
That's not relevant.
Not relevant. What? How is it not relevant? You're saying the
Excuse me, sir. Sir, I am a trained limnologist in practice. So I'm not flipping and just throwing stuff against the wall. I said to you, and I won't get argumentative, but the point here is that the question that is our job. Our job is to make comments about proper wastewater management. And we said the delta impact of the wastewater systems in this area on the lake is approximately that 8 parts per billion. So it is consuming that part of the budget. And what we said, and we documented, that that's not an insignificant component. In other words, there's not a lot of room for the other factors that do exist there. And so this is an elephant in the room, like Larry said. Years ago, they made projections. Well, that wastewater was 25 or 40%. So, and if your requirement look at it as a doctor, if your requirement is to stay under 10 or at least under 20, and if this activity is causing 8 of it, you probably should do something about it.
Well, that's the activity.
Okay, so I don't want to start, that's my point, and I'd be happy to chat with you one-on-one, but I don't want to consume everybody's time on this. So I just wanted to respond to those two items. So thank you, appreciate it.
Anyone else at the table?
No, my job. No, my job.
Well, I appreciate everybody's comment tonight, and I know that we lost a good amount of the room, and many of them had comments. I appreciate your comment of all questions need to be answered. We don't have, obviously, all the answers. We're very early in the planning process here, and, I will take all these comments. Our team will take all these comments to heart. We certainly have spent the last week rifling through the 260 comments that we received in writing, and we answered them the best we could. The project will certainly not go anywhere if we don't have the support of the people in this room, so we understand that. But I look at it as there's like two foundation things. One is the basis and the need of doing the project.
Correct.
So we understand, we heard you, I'm not going to go through, there was lots of questions, I don't have the answers, but clearly we need to get over that hurdle of is there a need or is there not a need, and is this going to solve something? The other one is related to the alternatives of how you actually do the project. That is well within our current scope. The other one is kind of, doing a watershed study is not, it's not at the purview of the WPCA, so it's a very difficult thing to answer. And it may be an impasse. I don't know. We'll see when we present things in the spring. The ones that I heard that I would like to, make sure that we follow up on is why certain properties, will there be flexibility, especially for the property that wasn't in the area. We literally were talking about it this morning and looking at different areas, and we were looking at the shading on the map, and we said, wow, this really should go a little bit further down this way, and that should probably go, to the east. But the lines were drawn where the lines were drawn. We're currently in the planning phase, and we're looking at where does it actually make sense, given the topography, given the density of the houses, and it's something that we're looking at now. So you'll see an updated map in the spring.
To that point, there are some that are right on the line. It's not even farther east or west. They're just right on the line.
Understood.
Are
Understood. There's always going to be a line, but I understand. We were looking at the line this morning.
I could look at the map with you and show you what I'm talking about. Because there are just properties like this one is just sort of carved out. It's not even equitable. That it's not red.
We understand. Something that we're looking at. Another comment that I heard was, a potential of a fifth alternative. All four of the alternatives involve sewering. And there wasn't an alternative that we were looking at related to what happens with the existing septics. If you fix the existing septics, what are the pros and cons of that? I think that's something we need to look at, because if we didn't present that come next spring, we wouldn't be anywhere. You would still have the same comment be yelling at us. The connection in rock comment, that's why we did some borings. We actually, if this ever went to final design, we need to do more borings. Rock is clearly a very costly extra thing to do, whether it's in the street or on private property. So that is why we did the borings. That's probably a case where we'd want to shallow up the sewers to try to limit the cost of both within the public right-of-way as well as on the private property.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Did you take soil samples during that time?
Did we? Yes.
Okay, do we have any results on that? I'm sorry? Do we have results on those?
The borings that we have, the boring logs will be in the report when it's completed.
Okay, we're unaware of that.
Are you looking for soil types or contaminants?
All of the above. When I saw the inside of the truck, it had in excess of 100 samples. So I wanted to know what those samples were for and what the results were.
We took a limited number for environmental contamination just to try to make sure that there wasn't a widespread problem, which we did not expect and did not find. But we do have grain size analysis on the water.
I'd like those results as soon as you get them.
That was one of the things we said we would provide, was the results of the borings and the results of the water main. And that was one of what we had said that would come out of this study, if nothing else, would be you would get the boring information and the water main information we have available.
The water main meaning the map?
Yeah.
The
best we could update, given, I mean, really we could update in a future final design phase if that ever occurred, but whatever we found, given the borings that we did and the mapping improvements, we will certainly provide.
Okay, thank you.
There was a comment about info available at the meeting versus on the website. I took that one to heart. I understand. I know we were several times made that comment, so we definitely walked right into that one. Try to make sure that we do better with that at the next public meeting. You know, there's some of these that I can't answer that I won't even, you know, there's certainly a lot of questions about, you know, who's benefiting, who should pay, you know. I hear you. That's not something that I can answer. That's something that we can talk, you know, with the WPCA and with others, and you know, see if we can advance that forward.
Quick question: when you talk about who's going to pay, what's First Light's, the owner of the lake? What's their input financially? I mean, this is an income-producing lake for them, and having looked at my electric bill the last few months, I think they're probably doing okay. Where's their contribution? The Candlewood Lake Authority has to scrape and claw to get, you know, 80 grand, you know, out of them. Like they're being generous. I mean, what's their involvement? They built the damn thing. Granted, it created a beautiful lake, I understand, but why don't they have any skin in the game?
Yes.
Thank you. Project area versus whole town, where will sewer go? I mean, you know, the comment concluded by saying don't advance any further until you know where the sewer is going to go. There are efforts that we can do that while we're trying to work this out. We understand that that is the major question, and we hope to have it answered. I think we're supposed to be getting some information back from Danbury by the end of the year. So we're hopeful that we can have a better idea of what the Danbury option looks like, if there is in fact an option, and if any other options exist, such as like the first selectwoman, Tara, was mentioning, Bethel having excess capacity than what they're using. Is it possible that they would provide that capacity to Brookfield? The wastewater treatment plant in town, I thought there was an interesting comment, I forget who made it, about, you know, taking capacity in from others. If you're actually going to go through the trouble of doing a wastewater treatment plant, it actually was a pretty good comment. You know, that would only be something to consider if that was the approach you were taking. But if you're going to go through and build a plant, does it make sense to make it a little bigger and try to make it a revenue source? I thought that was a great comment.
So we get stuck.
Right. Right. I would. Yeah. And the last one, I know which one I wanted to end on. I don't know if there's any others, because I didn't want other people to. Anybody else have anything? The last one came up twice, was that they felt like it was a sales pitch and as if we were trying to sell something. I promise you that that is not what I intended to be, or intended to make you feel. Hopefully it doesn't come across that way when we meet with you next time. I think that we may need more than one public meeting, because I feel like there's a number of issues that we need to work through in order to figure out exactly what we need to do. You know, we're here to do the current study, don't get me wrong. That's my company was hired to do the current study. And if it moved forward, you know, maybe my company would be designing sewers, but that doesn't mean that I am like trying to push something down your throat that I don't think you need. If it's decided that you don't want to build sewers, it's okay. I have plenty of work elsewhere in the state. You know, it's just we're trying to do the job we were hired to do, and we would like, you know, your support in doing that, and we like your input in doing that. That's how I think I'd like to close. Yes.
You had mentioned the municipal right-of-way, the town right-of-way, but you're aware that the Candlewood Shores is a special tax district that owns its own road, so there is no public right-of-way.
I wrote that comment down as well. That is in here of the, if you didn't allow us to come in. And if we get to the point where you're totally against the project, I don't know how it would possibly move forward. So.
Mentioned Lake Hopatcong in Jersey that had a sewer project in 2008. It overran by 40% revenue, it overran time-wise by years, and they put in sewers, and in the lake, they closed during 2 summers because of algae blooms afterwards, after the sewers were put in and functioning for 6 years. So I don't know why that's on the website even as like an example of this.
I can tell you that I have done a number of sewer extension projects in my career, and I can tell you that they have had tremendous benefit to the community. They actually increased the property values, they bettered the water quality. I mean, but it's something, when Nelson was trying to give an example earlier, it seemed like that's when a lot of people in the room left because it wasn't your lake. So I don't even want to go there. But I could give you plenty of examples where extending sewers in towns, and especially around lakes, has been a tremendous thing for everybody.
But you said they closed that lake, but you didn't say they closed the lake 5 years after they put in sewers.
How can it increase your property value when you're going to have liens on our property to pay for the sewer?
I understand the cost is the big issue. I understand the cost is the big issue. If you have a lien on your property, of course, that degrades your property value. But if I put a sewer on the street at no cost to any of you, and you connect it to that sewer, say it was no cost to you, the property of your house would undoubtedly go up. That is
Agreed. You'll
irrefutable.
put it on for no cost to me. You got my vote.
I understand. That's why we need to work through the cost, the grants factor. All of these things matter. All of your comments matter. So we need to have future public meetings, and I appreciate all your comments.
So next meeting, perhaps I cannot answer now, but we understand there's a moratorium on any new hookups and buildings because you don't have sewage capacity. We understand that that's an issue for the whole town, commercial development, particularly low-income housing. Low-income housing, we know, is going to be required, but I urge you to look at other towns that are starting to question whether or not that state law is actually feasible in today's environment when those projects will put a strain on the resources as they do in Brookfield, which requires to build a sewage plant. So we just want to make sure that we're not being used for that. We understand the need for it, etc., but that should be kept quite separate from the sewer project and the lake and the drinking water quality, which really gets mixed up with the bigger issue of low-income housing, development, and the sewage plant. So we'd like to keep those two separate and focus on whether or not there really is a need for sewers. We understand the need for the sewage plant, but let's keep the two separate.
Okay, thank you.
So we're at 9:30, we're going to do this again.
I didn't get my question answered, right?
So,
I asked Nelson.
I'm sorry, Joe. We're done. We can do another round of questions if we all want.
I didn't get my question answered. I asked where the 45% of the cost of the study came from. This goes, Greg, this goes to credibility. If you can't tell me where you got the money, then you people have no credibility. So if you want to sell a study on sewers that are needed, you have to be able to be upfront.
No, there's no hiding. It's on the website. No, there's no hiding at all. And it's in the budget of the WPCA that we're sponsoring, the WPCA.
And where does the WPCA generate that money from? Is that user fees from the current users of sewer?
It's mostly from...
Because it's not tax money. I know that they're separate.
No, that's right. The town and the WPCA have different set of books. And so the WPCA is an enterprise, and so it's an enterprise fund under government rules. And so the WPCA has to put up the other funds in order to, but we're charged with dealing with pollution problems, and so that's exactly what the money is used for.
Users now, so that you can spend it for a study. That's fact. That's, 1 and 1 is 2.
No, it's 55, 45. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay, laugh at me then. So that doesn't really...
Well, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right.
Right.
But that's not it. So
What
there's
was
nothing,
the- what
there's
was
no
the-
hiding it. It's all
What was the
open.
total cost of the study, if I can ask?
We got 2 open positions on the WPCA,
What was the
Oh, okay, I think we wound this down to the point of no return here.
So let's do this. Right there are 2 email addresses. If you've got more questions, I know it's 9:30. That's where you can ask them. You'll see the answers. Written response, like the first 260 questions. So send your questions in. Wait for the answers. Anything else from anybody here at the table?
May I just answer the question? Since it's relative to probably 5 of the people up there. Okay.
Elizabeth Longworth, President of Candlewood Shores Tax District. Timing, Tara, is everything. Not a good time when our taxes have been increased tremendously. So that's part of one of the reasons why everybody's not too happy.
Nothing's happening in a New York minute here, Elizabeth, and you know that.
I know that.
There's a lot of misinformation that you get happening across the board.
I agree.
It will not be on the ballot in November, and it will not be going to referendum in the spring. You can mark my words tonight, okay? So whoever's saying that, please stop the rumor.
It's on the,
I'm talking about the increase in our recent taxes that we just got.
I'm sorry, it was a revaluation year. Inflation
No.
is up. I mean,
What? No, I'm not asking for an explanation. I'm just stating the fact, and that is our taxes have gone up. We don't have any extra money to be forking out for something that may happen. Number two, the town of Brookfield, the sanitarian, the letter that's on the website specifically says that he's recommending that the sewers be implemented because the amount of people that are living in the houses and the increase of the homes. Well, here's an idea. Abide by our deed restrictions when I moved in there, and that was, can't go higher than a story and a half. Those have fell to the wayside by the town of Brookfield, so we would have still had those smaller homes if that was abided by. First Light. Who's here from First Light? Anybody? No? Okay.
First Light is the producer of the energy for the.
No, I know who they are. I'm just trying to get a hold of them for 3 years.
Yeah.
So I figured I would get him before he walks out. Exactly. Because they requested that we do a planting project down at our beach in excess of $100,000 to prevent the water runoff. Okay, and our application was submitted, that was 3 years ago. So, you know, if I get an answer, maybe I'll do that, and maybe the water runoff would be less. Candlewood Lake Authority, how about limiting the boats?
Yeah.
Okay. How about getting those people up Pine Island as I'm driving by and I can see them emptying themselves? Okay, figure something out with all of these islands. You're closing the islands because of this reason. And as everybody says, well, we're in this together. So if we do
So
these
listen,
little
folks,
things-
we're now into a big debate.
Okay.
Everyone had a chance to comment. We're going to have another meeting in the spring. That's where you ask your questions.
One more point.
I'm sorry, no.
April of
I'm sorry, no, excuse
2022,
me. Excuse
I asked
me.
these questions.
So
and I
there
didn't
we
get
are for
an
the
answer.
evening. We had the questions, we responded. That's where you ask more questions. You can come to a WPCA meeting, there's public comment. I'd like to turn the meeting back over to Nelson.
Got another hour. 10:30, it's 9:30. She's the president of our organization.
She could have been up here.
I'd like to just touch on what you just said, ma'am, because you said
Microphones, because we're recording this and you can't be here.
Elizabeth, you just said that you didn't get answers to the questions in the meeting that we held for you this past spring, and I would beg to differ. I want to tell you that my staff spent several hours, we had an entire panel, and you guys provided your questions that were very pointed before that meeting that we prepared for, and I thought we did a very thorough job. I never heard back from you. I assumed all your questions were answered. So if you're talking about zoning questions specifically and other concerns to your private community, I think we should have a private conversation, or you should see me in my office because I have some questions for you myself.
I've been trying to get a meeting with you for 3 weeks now. 3 months, I'm sorry.
And with whom have you spoken?
Your assistant.
You were asking for meetings with, we couldn't tell what you were looking for. Do you want one-on-one with me, or do I have to pull staff members in?
I'll send you an email directly.
Thank you.
I know you had your hand up for a while. Was it related to this project?
I think I could just put a whole summary, is that I feel bad because you have the engineering on the side.
Can you come up and take the microphone, just because?
You can't hear me?
Well, we're trying, you won't
Name
pick up
and
on
address.
the
Okay, my name's Karen Carter, I live on 11 Lakeview Road.
But you're not on the video here.
Where do you want me to stand?
Right here.
Okay, sorry.
Name is Karen Carter, 11 Lakeview Road, Candlewood Orchards. I haven't lived here long, 4 years. I'm on the lake. But some of the things that I feel bad because the engineering side is a secondary question. So yeah, we can talk about the alternatives, but I'm not past the first point, which is the necessity of doing sewers. And I don't feel confident that putting in sewers will end the result of lowering phosphorus and everything else that they're saying. Because I think we haven't delved into things that don't cost money. I believe that the inspections for septics are off, not inspections, but there's no accountability for how often you empty your septic. I believe that used to be, right? So there's one thing that is easy to do, and I believe you can do that. Second is, I look at the numbers and I think, well, our water is tested at Candlewood Orchards. We have outstanding drinking water. So, anybody else? I know. So we have to have it tested by the state. So it's very easy to look up. So we have no problem with drinking water. So take that off the table. So now we're thinking all the other things that affect the lake. We've had storms, weather, wind. Wind can do a lot. Runoffs. Okay? Runoffs are everywhere along the lake. Also, the other thing was, I'm trying to think, one more thing I wanted to say about the runoffs and whether we can't do anything about that at all. But the biggest thing is to stay focused on the necessity to do it. This is great, and these guys have put a lot of time in. They've been paid for their time. No disrespect for you guys. You're doing a great job, what you were tasked to do. My thing is, we shouldn't even be there. We need to be over here. We need to talk about what we can do that doesn't cost money. Okay, if you look at the figure, I don't know, my next door neighbor, I won't say who they are, they put about $35,000, $40,000 into a new septic system. Times that by half their septic systems are failing. What's that? I don't know, I'm not great at math. 50 times 40,000. 2 million? Is that, or more than that? What is that, 2 million?
200.
Lot lower. Lot lower than, 80 million or 100 million and all the unintended costs that come along, and they do. Lake Moramog, I know it's a different lake. You know about Lake Moramog? Saw a big thing with Sean Hayden, who gave a thing. What they do to their lake, they populate the lake to eat cyanobacteria. So they do a creation of getting certain bacteria out by introducing other things. They have air bubblers, which do other things. I'm not a scientist, but I look at that and I go, wow, maybe there are some other alternatives than to destroying a whole area that we're looking at. And also it's the cost, and who's going to do it? Obviously, if you're on the lake, maybe you don't want it, but who bears the cost of that? And someone says, well, of course if you have a problem, but there's many different ways to solve a problem. It's like a 5-prong. Some things we can do right away. Those septics that do every 2 years, you make it part of your taxes. There's things that we can do versus this monumental task. That's how I look at it. I don't think we delved into, we ran right to septics, sewers, versus we have a problem maybe, and where it is, what causes the problem, we're not sure. It's complicated. Well, there's a lot of things in life that are complicated, and that's why they're difficult to deal with. But there are things that we know that work. And let's do those first. And then we can see and reevaluate. Maybe the lake, also the lake too. I live in the lake. Karen Carter.
Karen Carter for first
The best part is the lake for COVID. Yes, we had an increase in the lake for COVID. Jet skis, wakeboarding. If you look at wakeboarding, those boats, they cause a lot of sediment coming up. I know it's silly, but anyhow, that's another thing. But there's so many other things to look at. So everyone had great comments tonight. I'm really impressed. I'm impressed at the community. I mean, just terrific people.
Oh, no, one time.
Thank you.
Just a quick response. I think I noted that there was a prior study done. Clearly there was a lot of questions about whether the need is there or not. The prior study concluded that it was, but clearly we need to revisit and present that. And then the only other thing, and I don't mean this because typically sewers are cheaper than addressing the septic system. $40,000 times 500 properties is $20 million. So, typically extending sewers is very comparable with everybody having to replace their septic systems. Over half of the septic systems are over 50 years old. The average life of a septic system is in maybe the 20 to 40 years, so they're well past their life. Even though you may think they're operating fantastically, they're well past their life. Thank you.
Okay, well, this is a meeting of the WPCA. We have our people here. So, thank you all for coming, and thank you for contributing. Maybe there was more heat and light in some cases, I'm not sure. But at this point, make a motion to adjourn. Maybe somebody can second it. You can make a motion? Okay, and there it is, Jim said. Okay, well, this is the WPCA has to make the motion, so Jim will make it. We'll just make a note of that, and well, thank you so much. And we're doing the best we can. So here we are, and maybe we'll have more light and heat the next time. Thank you.
Yeah.